Welcome back, friends. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from today, because you're about to witness a story that proves sometimes the most meaningful victories don't happen on a basketball court, they happen in the quiet moments when we recognize a face from our past. The Chicago winter had been particularly harsh that year, with icy winds whipping through the streets of the South Side neighborhood where Harlan Grant lived with his wife Eden and their 3 children. The small 2-bedroom apartment they called home for the past 8 years had always been modest, but it had been filled with love, laughter, and the dreams of better days ahead. But on this cold February morning, those dreams felt as fragile as the thin ice coating the windows. Harlan sat at his kitchen table, staring at the eviction notice that had arrived the previous day. After losing his job at the auto plant 3 months ago, the family had been struggling to keep up with rent, and now time had finally run out. Eden moved quietly around the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the kids before school. She hadn't said much since the notice arrived, but her eyes told a story of sleepless nights and silent prayers. Their oldest daughter, Willow, was in her final year of high school, her college acceptance letters bittersweet reminders of dreams that might now have to be deferred. The Grant family had always been proud, hardworking people who took care of their own. Harlan had grown up in these same neighborhoods, playing basketball on the concrete courts where dreams were born and sometimes broken. He'd been good too, good enough to play alongside some kids who would go on to become legends. As he sipped his coffee, his mind drifted back to those summer days in the early 1980s, when the courts at Rowan Park were alive with the sound of bouncing balls and teenage trash talk. Among the regular players was a skinny kid with an impossible vertical leap and an even more impossible work ethic, Michael Jordan. They weren't close friends, but they had shared countless games, the kind where you learned about someone's character not through words, but through the way they played. Harlan had admired the younger player's relentless drive, his refusal to accept defeat. Now, decades later, that same player had become not just a basketball legend, but a global icon. The irony wasn't lost on Harlan as he folded the eviction notice and tucked it into his pocket. Here he was, struggling to keep a roof over his family's head, while someone he used to play ball with had become one of the wealthiest athletes in history. But there was no bitterness in his thoughts, just the heavy weight of responsibility and the growing fear of letting his family down. Across town, in his downtown Chicago office, Michael Jordan was reviewing proposals for his latest business venture. The years had been kind to him, success following success, but he had never forgotten the courts where he'd learned the game, or the people who had been part of that journey. That morning, his assistant Gideon Rivers had placed a stack of local community outreach requests on his desk. Normally, these would be handled by his foundation, but something made him pause as he flipped through the papers. A familiar name caught his eye, Rowan Park Community Center, where he'd spent so many hours of his youth. The center was organizing a fundraiser to help families in the neighborhood facing housing insecurity. Attached was a list of recent eviction notices in the area, compiled by the center's director, Malcolm Rivers. Jordan scanned the names absently until one made him sit up straighter in his chair. Harlan Grant. The name triggered a flood of memories, summer games where Harlan's smooth jump shot had earned him the nickname Silk, pickup games that went on until the streetlights came on, the shared dreams of making it big that every kid on those courts had carried. Back in the Grants' apartment, Willow was helping her younger siblings, Theo and Quinn, get ready for school. She had inherited her father's height and her mother's quiet strength, along with a basketball talent that had earned her a scholarship to Northwestern. The irony of potentially having to turn it down due to their housing situation wasn't lost on her. Eden watched her children with a mixture of pride and worry. She had always taught them that education was the key to a better future, but now that future seemed to be slipping away. The family had exactly 2 weeks to either come up with 3 months of back rent or find somewhere else to live. Harlan prepared for another day of job hunting, his resume tucked into a worn folder. At 52, he was discovering that decades of reliable work experience meant little in a rapidly changing job market. But he wouldn't let his family down. There had to be a way. The morning news played quietly on the small kitchen TV, and suddenly Michael Jordan's face appeared on the screen. He was being interviewed about his latest business venture, but Harlan barely heard the words. Instead, he found himself transported back to those summer days, remembering the fierce competitions and the lessons learned on those concrete courts. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, Jordan was making a phone call to Malcolm Rivers at the community center, asking for more information about the Grant family. The basketball legend had never forgotten the players who had shared those early days with him, who had pushed him, challenged him, helped shape him into the competitor he would become. In his office, Jordan listened intently as Malcolm detailed the Grant situation. The story was unfortunately common, a hardworking family caught in a spiral of circumstances beyond their control. But there was nothing common about the connection that had suddenly bridged decades of separate lives. Gideon Rivers watched as his boss's expression changed while listening to the details. He had worked for Jordan long enough to recognize when something had captured the legend's full attention. This wasn't just another charitable cause, this was personal. Meanwhile, Harlan headed out into the cold Chicago morning, his breath visible in the winter air. He passed the old basketball court where he still occasionally shot hoops with his kids, teaching them the same lessons he'd learned there decades ago. The rim was slightly bent now, the chain link net a replacement for the original nylon, but the court still held its magic. What he couldn't have known was that his past was about to intersect with his present in a way that would change everything. The skinny kid with the incredible vertical leap had grown into a man who never forgot where he came from, or the people who had been there at the beginning. As the morning progressed, two parallel stories were unfolding across Chicago. In one, a proud family faced the quiet devastation of impending displacement. In the other, a basketball legend was setting in motion events that would remind everyone that sometimes the most important assists happen off the court. Eden called the community center, hoping they might know of any resources for families in their situation. She spoke with Malcolm Rivers, not knowing that he had just hung up from a conversation that would change their lives. Malcolm listened sympathetically, taking notes while glancing at the email he had just received from Jordan's office. In the Grant children's rooms, basketball posters covered the walls, many featuring Michael Jordan in his prime, soaring through the air in his iconic Bulls uniform. Harlan had told them stories about playing with the legend back in the day, but to them, they had always seemed like just that, stories from a distant past. The day continued its slow march forward, each hour bringing the Grant family closer to what seemed like an inevitable conclusion. But sometimes, life's most powerful moments happen when hope seems thinnest, when the final buzzer is about to sound, and an unexpected player steps onto the court. As evening approached, Harlan returned home from another disappointing day of job searching. He found Eden sitting at the kitchen table, holding an envelope that had just been delivered by courier. The return address made his heart skip a beat, the offices of Michael Jordan Enterprises. What happened next would prove that while time changes many things, it doesn't change the bonds forged on neighborhood basketball courts, or the power of remembering where you came from. The story that was about to unfold would remind everyone that sometimes the greatest achievements aren't measured in points scored or games won, but in lives touched and hope restored. The envelope sat on the Grant's kitchen table like a message in a bottle, carrying unknown possibilities across an ocean of years. Harlan's hands trembled slightly as he opened it, while Eden stood beside him, one hand resting supportively on his shoulder. Their children gathered around, sensing the gravity of the moment. Inside was a letter, written on elegant stationery bearing the Jordan brand logo. But it wasn't the letterhead that caught Harlan's attention, it was the handwritten note at the bottom, in a familiar scrawl he remembered from basketball scorecards decades ago. "Silk, we need to talk. Some shots are too important to miss." Across town, in his private office overlooking the Chicago skyline, Michael Jordan was reviewing old photographs with his assistant, Gideon Rivers. The images, pulled from community center archives, showed younger versions of himself and Harlan on the courts at Rowan Park. In one particular photo, they were both mid-jump, reaching for a rebound, their futures still unwritten. "I remember that day," Jordan told Gideon, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "Harlan had this perfect jump shot, smooth as silk. We used to say he never broke a sweat, even in the middle of July. But it wasn't just his game. He was always the one making sure the younger kids got their turns, keeping the peace when things got heated." Malcolm Rivers, the community center director, had provided Jordan with more details about the Grant's situation. The auto plant closure had affected hundreds of families in the area, but something about Harlan's story had struck a particular chord. Perhaps it was the memory of those summer days, or maybe it was the recognition that sometimes life's biggest challenges had nothing to do with sports. The next morning, Harlan found himself walking into the gleaming lobby of Jordan's downtown office building. The security guard, Blaze Stone, directed him to a private elevator. The contrast between this world and his current reality wasn't lost on him, but neither was the memory of a skinny teenager who had worked harder than anyone else to create this success. Jordan's office was surprisingly understated, with just a few carefully chosen mementos from his legendary career. When Harlan entered, Michael stood up from behind his desk, and for a moment, decades melted away. They weren't a global icon and a struggling family man. They were just two kids from the South Side who had once shared a court and dreams of greatness. "Silk," Jordan said, using the old nickname with a warmth that bridged the years. "Still got that jump shot?" The question was light, but his eyes were serious, studying the toll that recent hardships had taken on his former teammate. Harlan managed a small smile. "These days, I mostly teach it to my kids. Willow's got a better shot than I ever had." The mention of his daughter brought reality rushing back. The eviction notice, the uncertain future, the weight of responsibility. Jordan nodded, gesturing for Harlan to take a seat. "Tell me about your family," he said. Not as a celebrity doing charity, but as someone who remembered the teenager who had once helped him up after a hard foul and said, "Keep playing. You've got something special." For the next hour, Harlan opened up about everything: the job loss, the struggle to find new work, Willow's scholarship to Northwestern that they might have to turn down, the younger kids' confusion about why they might have to leave their home. He spoke with dignity, never asking for help, just sharing his story with an old friend who had asked to hear it. Jordan listened intently, occasionally making notes. When Harlan finished, there was a moment of silence before Michael pressed an intercom button. "Gideon, bring in the proposals." Minutes later, his assistant entered with a folder containing several documents. "I've been looking to expand our youth basketball program," Jordan explained, spreading the papers on his desk. "We need someone who understands both the game and the community. Someone who can teach more than just jump shots." He looked directly at Harlan. "The position comes with a housing allowance." The offer wasn't charity, it was an opportunity, presented with the same directness that had characterized their games decades ago. Jordan wasn't just offering to pay off the back rent, he was offering a way forward, a chance for Harlan to use his experience and knowledge to help other kids from the neighborhood. Back at home, Eden was sorting through old photographs, including some from those summer days at Rowan Park. She found one of Harlan and Michael after a game, both drenched in sweat but grinning, the setting sun casting long shadows across the court. She showed it to Willow, who studied it with newfound understanding of her father's stories. When Harlan returned home that evening, his family could see the change in his bearing before he said a word. Hope had returned to his eyes. As they gathered around the kitchen table, their gathering place for both celebrations and challenges, he shared the details of the meeting. The job offer was just the beginning. Jordan had also arranged for financial advisors to help the family restructure their obligations, ensuring they wouldn't face such vulnerability again. But more than that, he had reminded Harlan of something important: that sometimes our past connections can help light the way to our future. Word of Jordan's intervention began to spread through the neighborhood, but not in the way such stories usually did. This wasn't about a celebrity's charitable act. It was about two kids from the South Side remembering the lessons they'd learned on those concrete courts. Malcolm Rivers, watching from his office at the community center, understood the deeper significance. "This is how community is supposed to work," he told his staff. "We lift each other up, not because of obligation, but because we remember who we are and where we came from." The next day, Jordan visited the community center, not with cameras or fanfare, but to shoot some baskets with Harlan and the local kids. They weren't a legend and a man down on his luck. They were just two former teammates sharing the game they loved with the next generation. Willow watched in amazement as her father and Michael Jordan demonstrated the perfect jump shot form, their movements still synchronized after all these years. She saw beyond the celebrity now, understanding that this was about something more fundamental than fame or fortune. Eden, standing at the edge of the court, caught Jordan's eye and mouthed a silent, "Thank you." His response was a small shake of his head and a gesture toward Harlan. This wasn't about thanks, it was about recognition. Recognition of worth, of dignity, of the bonds that survive time and circumstance. The community center kids gathered around, listening intently as Harlan and Jordan shared stories from their playing days. But they weren't just telling tales about basketball, they were passing on lessons about perseverance, about community, about never forgetting where you came from. That evening, as the sun set over Chicago, casting the same long shadows that had witnessed countless games decades ago, Harlan and Michael sat on the bleachers, watching the next generation play. They talked about life, about changes, about the importance of being there for each other. "You know," Jordan said, bouncing a basketball absently, "I've won a lot of games, but some of the most important lessons I learned were right here, from players like you. About dignity, about looking out for others, about playing the game the right way." The impact of Jordan's intervention rippled through the community. Other successful individuals began reaching out to the community center, offering jobs, mentorship, support. The story had reminded them that success wasn't just about individual achievement, it was about lifting others up along the way. Gideon Rivers, working late in Jordan's office, found himself organizing a new initiative, a program to reconnect successful professionals with their childhood communities, creating networks of support and opportunity. The Grant family's story had sparked something larger than itself. In the Grant household, things began to change. With the immediate crisis averted and a new path forward secured, the family could breathe again. Willow's college dreams were back on track, and the younger children's faces had lost the worry that no child should have to carry. Harlan's new position at the youth program gave him more than just financial stability, it gave him purpose. He was sharing not just basketball skills, but life lessons learned both in victory and defeat. And sometimes, when the light hit the court just right, he could still see those summer days when anything seemed possible. Eden noticed other changes too. The community that had seemed to be fraying under economic pressure was pulling together again. Neighbors were reaching out to neighbors, sharing resources, information, support. The Grant family story had reminded everyone that no one succeeds entirely alone. The basketball court at Rowan Park, where it had all begun, took on new significance. Jordan arranged for its renovation, not to put his name on it, but to ensure it remained what it had always been, a place where kids could dream, where community could gather, where the game could teach its timeless lessons. As winter turned to spring, the Grant family's story became part of neighborhood lore, not as a tale of celebrity charity, but as a reminder of the bonds that survive time and circumstance. It proved that sometimes the most important assists in life happen far from the spotlights, in the quiet recognition of shared humanity. The envelope that had arrived that February evening had contained more than just a job offer or financial salvation. It had carried a reminder that we are all connected by the courts we played on, the dreams we shared, the communities that shaped us. And sometimes, when we least expect it, those connections can change everything. Spring arrived in Chicago with a sense of renewal that seemed to mirror the transformation taking place in the South Side community. The renovated basketball court at Rowan Park gleamed under the morning sun, its fresh paint and new backboards standing as symbols of revival. But the real changes were happening in the lives of the people who gathered there. Harlan Grant's new position as Director of Youth Programs had given him more than just financial stability. Each morning, he arrived early at the community center, often finding kids already waiting, basketballs tucked under their arms and dreams tucked in their hearts. Among them was his son Theo, who had begun to see his father in a new light. The program itself had evolved beyond simply teaching basketball skills. Harlan had structured it to include mentorship, academic support, and life skills training. His own experience, both the triumphs and struggles, had shaped his approach to helping the next generation. Eden noticed the change in her husband first. The weight of desperation had lifted from his shoulders, replaced by the straight-backed confidence she remembered from their younger days. She watched from the community center's kitchen, where she had started volunteering, as he worked with the neighborhood kids. "You see that follow-through?" He would tell them, demonstrating the perfect jump shot form. It's just like life, you have to follow through on your commitments, your dreams, your responsibilities. The kids would nod, understanding that he was teaching them about more than just basketball. Michael Jordan's involvement hadn't stopped with the initial intervention. He made regular, unpublicized visits to the center, often arriving with minimal fanfare to shoot hoops with the kids and share stories with Harlan. Their friendship, rekindled by circumstance, had deepened into a genuine partnership in community building. Malcolm Rivers, the community center director, found himself fielding calls from other successful athletes and business leaders who had grown up in the area. Jordan's example had sparked something, a recognition that success carried with it a responsibility to remember and support the communities that had shaped them. Willow Grant's story had taken its own inspiring turn. With the family's stability restored, she had accepted her scholarship to Northwestern. But she didn't leave the community behind. Every afternoon after classes, she returned to help coach the girls' basketball program her father had started. One particular evening, as the sun cast long shadows across the court, Willow worked with a group of young girls on their defensive stance. Among them was Kira Cole, a 12-year-old whose family was facing challenges similar to what the Grants had experienced. "My dad might lose his job," Kira had confided in Willow during a water break. "We might have to move." The words carried the same fear that Willow remembered from her own family's crisis. But now she could offer more than just sympathy. Through the network that had grown around the community center, Harlan and Eden had created a resource system for families facing housing insecurity. Working with local businesses, including some of Jordan's contacts, they had established a support structure that went beyond temporary fixes to address root causes. The community center's conference room became a hub for financial literacy workshops, job training programs, and housing assistance meetings. Gideon Rivers, Jordan's assistant, coordinated with local professionals who volunteered their expertise, creating a bridge between the business world and the neighborhood's needs. One morning, Jordan arrived at the center earlier than usual, finding Harlan already working with a small group of teenagers. Among them was Archer Hayes, a talented player whose family had recently faced eviction. The basketball legend stood quietly in the doorway, watching as his old friend taught lessons that went far beyond the game. "Basketball is like life," Harlan was saying, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Sometimes you miss the shot, but that's not what defines you. What matters is getting back up, adjusting your form, and taking the next shot with confidence." The words resonated with Jordan, reminding him of similar lessons he'd learned on these very courts decades ago. He stepped forward, joining the conversation with his own perspective on resilience and determination. The teenagers listened intently, understanding that they were receiving wisdom from two men who had faced very different but equally challenging journeys. The Grant family's younger children, Theo and Quinn, had found their own ways to contribute to the community's revival. Theo had started a peer tutoring program, combining academic support with basketball training. Quinn, artistic and thoughtful, created a mural on the community center's wall, depicting the neighborhood's history and hopes for the future. Eden's role had expanded as well. What started as volunteer work in the center's kitchen had grown into a full-fledged community nutrition program. She worked with local grocers and restaurants to provide healthy meals for program participants, understanding that physical nourishment was as important as athletic training. The impact of these changes began to show in unexpected ways. School attendance in the neighborhood improved. Crime rates dropped. More importantly, there was a renewed sense of pride and possibility in the community. The basketball court had become more than just a place to play. It was a symbol of transformation and hope. Local business owners like Cyrus Lane, who ran a sporting goods store, began offering equipment and uniforms to program participants. Felix Vaughn, a retired teacher, volunteered to provide academic tutoring. The community was coming together, recognizing that everyone had something to contribute. Jordan's regular presence had another unexpected effect. Media attention, when it came, focused not on celebrity charity but on the power of community connections and shared responsibility. The story became about how success could be measured not just in personal achievements but in the ability to lift others up. One evening, as Harlan locked up the community center, he found Jordan waiting outside, bouncing a basketball thoughtfully. "You know what I've realized?" the legend said, passing the ball to his friend. "All those championships, all those awards, they matter. But what's happening here? This might be more important." The two men played a quiet game of one-on-one, just like in the old days. But now their competition was friendly, focused on showing the watching kids that basketball could be about joy and connection rather than just winning and losing. The program's success led to expansion plans. Other community centers in Chicago began adopting the model Harlan had developed. Jordan's business team, led by Gideon Rivers, worked to create a sustainable framework that could be replicated in other neighborhoods facing similar challenges. Willow's experiences helping her father with the program influenced her studies at Northwestern. She began focusing on community development and sports psychology, seeing how athletic programs could be used as tools for social change. Her professors noted that she brought a unique perspective, combining academic theory with real-world experience. The Grant family's home, once nearly lost, had become a gathering place for community planning and celebration. Eden hosted monthly dinners where program participants and their families could share meals and stories. These evenings became known for their warmth and the sense of extended family they created. As spring turned to summer, the lessons learned continued to resonate. The basketball court at Rowan Park was never empty, but now it held more than just games. It held hope, possibility, and the understanding that community connections could overcome even the most daunting challenges. Jordan's influence extended beyond his financial support. His example of remembering and giving back to his roots inspired other successful individuals to do the same. The result was a growing network of mentorship and opportunity that stretched far beyond the basketball court. The story of the Grant family and their revival became a testament to the power of recognition and responsibility. It showed that sometimes the most meaningful assists happen off the court, in the quiet moments when one person recognizes another's worth and potential. As another evening settled over the south side, Harlan stood at center court, watching the next generation practice their shots. The sound of bouncing balls and excited voices filled the air, carrying with it the promise of better days ahead. He smiled, knowing that while not every kid would become a basketball legend, each one had the potential to become something equally important, a member of a caring, connected community. 1 year after Michael Jordan's unexpected intervention in the Grant family's life, the Rowan Park Community Center hosted a special evening celebration. The summer air was warm, filled with the sounds of laughter and basketball games in progress. But this wasn't just any community gathering, it was a testament to how one act of recognition could transform an entire neighborhood. Harlan Grant stood at the podium, looking out over the assembled crowd. In the front row sat his family, Eden, beaming with pride, Willow, home from her successful first year at Northwestern, Theo and Quinn, both now actively involved in community programs they'd helped create. Behind them sat row after row of community members whose lives had been touched by the changes of the past year. Michael Jordan sat quietly among the crowd, not as a celebrity but as a member of the community. His presence had become a regular sight at the center, but tonight held special significance. The program they were launching would extend beyond Chicago, creating a network of community support centers across the country. "A year ago," Harlan began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "I thought I was facing the end of everything my family had built. What I didn't realize was that I was actually at the beginning of something much bigger than myself." In the audience, Malcolm Rivers nodded in agreement. The community center director had watched the transformation unfold, seeing how one family's story had sparked a movement of neighborhood renewal. Next to him sat Gideon Rivers, whose work with Jordan's organization had helped create a sustainable model for community support. The statistics told part of the story. Youth program participation had tripled, high school graduation rates in the neighborhood had improved, and family displacement rates had dropped significantly. But the real story was written on the faces of the people gathered in that room. There was Archer Hayes, whose family had been the first to benefit from the housing stability program that grew out of the Grants' experience. Now he was heading to college on a basketball scholarship, but more importantly, he had become a mentor to younger kids in the program. Kira Cole, the young girl who had confided her fears to Willow, sat with her family. Her father hadn't lost his job after all. The community network had helped him find new opportunities. Now she was one of the star players in the girls' basketball program, her confidence growing both on and off the court. Eden's community nutrition program had expanded beyond the center, partnering with local restaurants and grocers to ensure that no family in the neighborhood went hungry. Her work had caught the attention of city officials, who were looking to implement similar programs across Chicago. Blaze Stone, the security guard who had first welcomed Harlan to Jordan's office that fateful day, had become a regular volunteer at the center, teaching self-defense classes that combined physical training with lessons about respect and responsibility. The basketball court itself had become more than just a place to play. It was where business professionals held mentoring sessions, where college counselors met with students, where families gathered to support each other. The lessons learned there went far beyond jump shots and defense strategies. Jordan took the podium next, his presence commanding but warm. "When I was young," he began, "these courts taught me about more than just basketball. They taught me about community, about lifting each other up, about the responsibility we have to remember where we came from." He gestured to Harlan. Some people might look at this story and see it as one successful person helping someone in need. But that's not what happened here. This is about recognizing the value that exists in our communities, about understanding that true success isn't just about individual achievement. The new initiative they were announcing would create a network of community centers, each built around the model developed at Rowan Park. It wasn't just about basketball programs or financial assistance. It was about creating sustainable communities where people could find the support and opportunities they needed to thrive. Willow spoke next, sharing how her experiences over the past year had shaped her academic focus and career goals. She was now interning with Jordan's foundation, helping to develop youth programs that combined athletic training with academic support and life skills education. "What I've learned," she told the audience, "is that every community has its own Michael Jordan, not necessarily a basketball legend, but someone who made it out and has the power to reach back and help others. The key is creating the connections that make those interventions possible." Theo and Quinn had prepared a special presentation, a documentary they'd created capturing the stories of families helped by the center's programs. The film showed the ripple effects of community support, how helping one family could lead to positive changes for entire neighborhoods. Local business owners who had become involved with the center shared their perspectives. Cyrus Lane talked about how providing sports equipment to program participants had not only helped kids in need but had created a sense of investment in the community's future. Felix Vaughn, the retired teacher who had started volunteering at the center, described how the academic support program had grown to include college preparation services, career counseling, and mentorship opportunities. "We're not just teaching subjects," he explained, "we're teaching possibilities." The evening included recognition of the many volunteers and supporters who had helped make the program successful. Among them was Fiona Grant, Harlan's sister, who had moved back to the neighborhood to help coordinate the housing assistance program, using her real estate expertise to help families find stable housing solutions. Jordan's business team, led by Gideon Rivers, presented plans for the program's national expansion. They had developed partnerships with other professional athletes and business leaders who wanted to create similar programs in their own childhood neighborhoods. As the formal presentations concluded, the celebration moved to the basketball court for a community game. Jordan and Harlan teamed up once again, just as they had decades ago, but this time they were playing alongside the next generation of community leaders they had helped nurture. Eden watched from the sidelines, remembering the fear and uncertainty of a year ago. The contrast between then and now was striking, not just in their family circumstances, but in the renewed spirit of the entire community. The game was friendly but competitive, with players of all ages and skill levels participating. It was a physical demonstration of what the center had become, a place where differences in age, background, and ability didn't matter as much as the shared commitment to community. As the evening drew to a close, Harlan and Jordan stood at center court, surrounded by the community they had helped rebuild. The moment wasn't about basketball legends or personal success stories. It was about the power of remembering where you came from and the responsibility to help others find their way. "You know what makes this special?" Jordan asked, gesturing to the gathered crowd. It's not about me or you anymore. It's about them, about what they'll do with the opportunities we've helped create. Harlan nodded, understanding perfectly. He watched as Theo helped some younger kids with their shooting form, as Willow discussed college plans with a group of high school students, as Eden coordinated with volunteers for the next day's programs. The story that had begun with an eviction notice and a chance recognition had evolved into something far more significant. It had become a model for community renewal, a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful victories happen not in championship games but in the daily efforts to lift each other up. As families began heading home, the sound of basketballs still echoed across the court. The lights of Rowan Park shone brightly in the Chicago night, a beacon of hope and possibility for the community it served. The Grant family's journey had come full circle, from facing displacement to helping prevent it for others. But more than that, they had helped demonstrate that community bonds, when recognized and nurtured, could overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and share a story about someone who reached back to help their community. Because sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come from those who remember where they started and understand the power of lifting others up along the way.